Everyone, welcome to today's lesson on the ACT reading section. This is the third section that you're taking on the ACT. It's right after the math section and after you have a 10-minute break. So let's first go over the breakdown of the ACT reading section. It's 40 questions in 35 minutes. So again, you got more questions than minutes, which I know at first sounds a little daunting, but after we go through tips, tricks, and strategies, you'll be able to see how it's not as bad as it looks. We have 4 passages that are about 800 to 850 words each, with 10 questions in each passage. They're always in the same order. You got prose fiction first, social science second, humanities third, and then natural science last. And it is important to note that one of the 4 passages has paired passages. So what are these? These are basically 2 smaller passages inside of one. And the nice thing about the ACT reading is that it's more about reading comprehension than critical thinking. This is one of the things that separates it from the SAT reading section, if you remember from our ACT introduction video. So it's more about, can you find things in the text and be able to answer multiple choice questions correctly? Obviously, you have some inference questions that you're going to need to think outside the box, but in my opinion, it's not as much as the SAT reading section. So before we go over the passage types for the ACT reading, I just wanted to go over the question types that you will see on test day. So the first one I'm going to go over is the main idea or general questions. These basically focus on the entire passage as a whole. They're broad, they can be main idea, purpose, or shift questions in a passage. So like, what is the main idea of the passage? Why is the writer talking about a particular subject in the second half of the passage compared to the first half? I would really recommend doing these types of questions last, simply because you need to understand the passage as a whole before you start answering these questions. So after you've read through the passages and after you've answered other questions that are more specific, you'll have a better idea of the main idea questions or general questions. All right, vocab and context. That is actually a type of question that you could do as one of your first ones. It's basically figuring out the meaning of a word in a particular context. So you'll have a specific line and you'll basically almost have to like substitute an answer choice in for that word and make sure it still makes sense. So that's my main strategy here. Try to take the answer choices and plug them into the passage at that particular point for the word, and the flow of the passage should still make sense. It's in the correct context. Remember, it's vocab and context, not just can you figure out the definition of a word. So this is very important because the passage still needs to make sense. And again, you should do these types of questions earlier since you're looking at a specific line. Try to read a couple lines above and below that specific line just so that you get some context, and it will help you when you're plugging in answer choices. All right, inference questions. You're making a logical assumption. Logical, that's the main word here, guys. Logical assumption based off of information given in the passage. It needs to be reasonable. It needs to make sense given what you know from the passage. And it needs to be a logical inference. It cannot be something that would not even connect remotely close to the passage. And one major tip for these questions, try to avoid extreme language in your answer choices. Like if it's like always or never, unless the passage itself is really one-sided and more on the extreme side in terms of what the author is going for, more than not, it's not going to be those choices. It's going to be something that's more neutral. And you need to understand the passage before you answer these questions, because obviously you're taking what you know in the passage and trying to pick an answer that logically extends what you know. So you should do these questions later. All right, detailed line reference questions. This is probably the one with vocab and context that you should be doing first when you're answering questions. It's a specific point from the passage, and you have specific lines to go back to in the passage, so you'll be able to kind of just jog your memory on what exactly was there, and you'll be able to answer those questions effectively. Plus, as we'll get into this when we talk about passage types, but if you're kind of annotating as you go along, understanding in each paragraph what's going on, it's going to help you a little bit more in terms of recalling, okay, where do I go in the passage? And where can I go specifically look at, so you're not spending so much time rereading the passage to figure out a specific detail. All right, function questions. This is the purpose of a specific line or paragraph. It's a step up from the detail questions. You should understand the passage first before doing these questions. These should probably be the questions you do like after your specific line reference / detail questions, because once you understand what's going on in the passage, you'll be able to understand why the author put a specific phrase or the meaning of a specific line after you understand what exactly is going on with passage flow. And then the last type are Roman numeral questions. These are basically 3 different options for an answer to a particular question, and you're trying to determine which ones are correct. So it's like 1, 2, 3, like in Roman numerals. You kind of want to work strategically for these questions because some of them might be a little challenging. So what I would try to do is to check which option is in a majority of the answer choices and see if it's right or wrong to try to help you eliminate answer choices. Obviously, if you get a Roman numeral question that you know, you can go straight down the line and eliminate answers and check answers that you think are right. But I think if you're a little bit stuck on these questions, trying to work strategically is really going to help you. So for an example, let's say we have for a question, our answer choices are 1 only, 2 only, 1 and 3 only, and then 1, 2, and 3. So let's say I'm having a little bit of trouble figuring out, okay, which one would I pick for my answer? So I try to go to the answer choices and say, okay, which answer choice, which number, like 1, 2, or 3, which one is appearing in the most amount of answer choices? So I see that, okay, 1, I see that in 3 answer choices, A, C, and D. So the first thing I'm going to do is go straight to 1 and try to see if that is correct. If 1 is correct, B is immediately eliminated, and we would keep going. I would check 3 next, because if 3 is right or wrong, that can determine whether it's C or if it's D. If 1, let's say 1 was incorrect, well, we already have our answer B, which is 2 only. So sometimes you'll get Roman numeral questions. You can work through them, work through each choice, and you'll be able to go through it pretty quickly. But if not, try to look at the answer choices and see which one is appearing in a majority of them to try to strategically eliminate choices if you can. All right, so now let's go over the passage types on the ACT reading exam. The first one is the prose fiction passage. It's a fiction piece. It's like a short story or a novel excerpt. Setting, atmosphere, characters, plot, dialogue, they matter here a lot more because it is a fiction piece. There's not going to be a lot of, factual information here, or at least that's not the main focus of the passage. You're going to get a lot of implied meaning questions, right? Why do characters do what they do? What is the purpose of the plot moving in a particular direction? Why is the setting this for a particular scene? So you need to be able to understand what's going on in the passage and then be able to kind of figure out what exactly was the author's purpose in having a particular choice be the way it is. In my opinion, unless you're really good with fiction, you should probably do this passage last, since it's going to take you the most amount of time to kind of understand what's going on and then answer the questions. I feel like the other passages are a lot more straightforward, and the answers itself are a lot more straightforward as well. But specifically, how do we read prose fiction passages? We want to focus on the beginning paragraphs for like story, characters, and context, and then we want to read the other paragraphs normally for plot development. So in the introduction paragraph, we're going to get like kind of what's going on, where's our setting, who are our characters, kind of setting up for the rest of the story, which is the plot. So we have an example here. This is a paired passage. So typically for paired passages, what I would do is I would read the first passage first, then go to the questions for it, then read the second passage, do the questions for that second passage alone, and then do questions that compare both passages. I'm not going to go through everything in these passages or the questions, just in interest of time, but I will pause here for you guys to pause the video and just read these passages on your own. But we can quickly go over and see what exactly is going on. So if we focus on the first part here, we see that there's this guy named Luck, and he's allowing the narrator to go back to the back room and talking about pianos and his fundamental beliefs about pianos having different individual characteristics. And if we skim through here, he's talking about how does he get his pianos, what are some rules that he has for pianos, what is his beliefs about it, how does it tie into his philosophy of life. Okay, so just from skimming it really fast, I know it's a guy named Luck, and he's really trying to, well, not really trying to, but he has a specific way of kind of connecting with pianos. He believes they're important and he should have an intimate relationship with them. Okay, So now I go to the questions, and I'll pause here for you guys to pause the video and work through the questions. But I see that first question is passage A. It's a line reference question. So I can go back to these lines, read some context, and answer it. Another passage A question, I see I have lines 25 through 26. So again, I can read a couple lines above and below and figure that out. And then I got a vocab and context question here. We have bit into in line 32. So I'd go back to that line and see which one of these words we would be able to substitute in, and for the passage to still make sense. All right, so we're going to go back to passage B now and kind of skim through it here. We're talking about this Mark Lifshitz. He's an oboist. He's talking about how him and his oboe, they kind of work together. Basically that, he can't make music without his oboe, and his oboe by itself doesn't make music either. So then we talk about another guy, Joseph Roizman, about his relationship with his violin. So one of the things that we want to think about when we're going through paired passages is there some sort of relationship between the passage, right? So obviously we're talking about musical instruments here. And in this passage, we're talking more about the relationship between the musician and their instrument compared to here where it's focusing on how one person deals with their relationship with piano. So it's about the relationship between musicians and their musical instruments, and we're kind of looking at the differences between it. So again, I'd answer passage B questions first. When they're line references, I want to do those first. So 4 and 5 definitely would be the first ones I'd do. 6, we got an inference question. 7 is a detail because it says like stating that. And then 8 through 10 are your comparing both passages where you need to understand both passages first to be able to answer it. So try to answer through the questions. Here are the answers just for you to check how well you did. Again, we're moving on just for the sake of time. All right, moving on to social science passages. These are passages that are read in a social studies class. They're talking about a wide range of issues and they give lots of facts. And the organization in these passages is pretty logical. You have like topic sentences and a clear flow of information. And it should be one of the earlier passages you do. Ideally, either your second or your first passage that you do. I'd say second, probably. But it is good in terms of understanding what's going on, and it's a lot better, in my opinion, compared to prose fiction. So how would we read these kinds of passages? We want to focus mainly on the first paragraph, topic sentences, and the last paragraph, because the first paragraph is kind of giving us the main topic, what exactly is going on, and then topic sentences of each body paragraph is just saying what each paragraph is about. A lot of the times, the other sentences of your body paragraphs are just supporting details for the topic sentence, so that's why I said you can read them a little bit more quickly. Obviously not too fast, but you can read them a little faster than normal. Your first paragraph, topic sentences, and your conclusion, that's what you want to focus on the most. So here's an example. I'll pause here really quickly for you guys to pause the video and try to read the passage yourself. But as we can focus on the first paragraph first, we're talking about Kenny Holmes, who is kind of talking about his history right now. He was raised in Gordon Heights. Keen sense of ambition. Okay, and then kind of atmosphere, talking about music, like popular music in the 50s and 60s. He was good at making money at music, and he's talking about being ambitious. So it's talking about him being ambitious and him liking music a lot from what I'm skimming through. And he's wedding musician, wedding singer, talking about over here. And then it's talking about his experience with his musicians. Okay, so that is a really brief skim. Obviously, you want to spend a little bit more time understanding the passage, but just for time's sake, I'm kind of just highlighting what are the most important things here. So we see the questions start here. Main purpose of the passage. Again, I'd probably come back to those questions. I'm looking straight for line reference questions or details. Okay, this is a detail question. The residents of Gordon Heights 50s and 60s. You can find that in the passage. But line reference, yes, this is a main purpose question, so you'd probably want to be careful. Same thing with 16 and 18. But we do have a vocab and context question. The last one, lines 86 through 87, something more canned. What does that refer to? So it seems like a lot more of these questions are more, inference / big picture / purpose questions, which sometimes can happen. but that just means you need to focus a little bit more when you're reading the passage. So kind of one of the things I would do, and this really applies to all passages, is after each paragraph, I just try to kind of summarize what's going on. And I tried doing that as we were going through the passage on the initial read. But if you can kind of understand what each paragraph is getting at, even if it's a broad idea, just a couple words, you'll have a better idea of what's the flow of the passage. And if you need to look at, a specific detail, you know where to go more specifically. So I'll pause here for you guys to work through the questions. And then here are the answers for you guys to check your answers and see how you did. All right, humanities passage. It's a mixture of artistic, social, and biographical texts. It's basically nonfiction passages that have much more of a personal tone and organic narrative. That's kind of what separates it from social science passages. They can still have a lot of facts, though. And it should be one of the later passages that you do, probably your second to last, right before your prose fiction passage, in my opinion. So how do we read these? Very similar to social sciences passages. You want to focus on your introduction paragraph, your topic sentences for each paragraph, and then your last paragraph, your conclusion. And again, you want to read through the other sentences, the body paragraphs, a little bit quickly because it's mainly supporting details. So here's an example. I will pause here for a second for you guys to pause the video and work through the passage. But basically, we'll start kind of skimming through it a little bit. We're talking about photographs as educational resources, talking about photos of American Indians, as Indian people were trying to adapt changes. They took thousands of studio portraits, and talking about so what it's talking about here is mainly photographers and how they are capturing different aspects of American Indian people to use as educational resources to kind of get an inner look into their lives. So this Geronimo, Apache's fight, there's a lot of supporting details in the body sentences of these body paragraphs. Okay, education potential is enormous. They're not objective. Okay, so here's kind of limitations of pictures. But you need to understand factual information to really understand the photograph. It can be combined with that. Okay, so mainly photographs as educational resources. That's what we're looking at in this passage. Again, on actual test day, make sure you're paying attention to these supporting details. I'm just kind of going through it generally for the sake of time. So we can go to the questions here. It starts here. Which is following rhetorical techniques. Okay, repeatedly used in the passage. This is one of those general questions in a way. You kind of need to understand the passage first before you answer them. So I'd probably come back to this. Here are the other questions. I'd go straight to line reference. So yes, it's lines that are kind of jumping around the passage for 23 and 24, but those are probably the first ones I'm starting with unless I want to do 30 first because it's a vocab and context. The rest are kind of broader / detail questions. Definitely 27 and 28. Probably, and maybe 29. Those are detail questions. Once you understand the passage, probably do those next before you go back and do big picture questions. So I hope by now you guys are kind of starting to see a pattern here. We want to do these line reference questions first before we start doing big picture questions. So I'll pause for a second for you guys to go through these questions. And here are the answers for you to check how well you guys did on this passage. All right, and then natural science is our last type. It's a science passage that's not coming from a textbook. You have a lot of details and technical descriptions, and they're typically clear topic sentences and transitions to develop their main idea. In my opinion, this should be the first passage you do. I know it's science, but it's really good in terms of organization-wise, and I feel like you guys will be able to understand it better. So how do we read these natural science passages? We want to focus first on the beginning paragraph and then the topic sentences of the specific body paragraphs before getting into the conclusion and understanding what that's about. So it's very similar to the past couple passages we've talked about. You want to know your introduction, your topic sentences, and then your conclusion, mainly, and then focus on the supporting details in the middle. So here's an example of a natural science passage. I'll pause for a second for you guys to look at it and start annotating, but kind of just going through it on a quick skim. We have adaptations of plants to deserts. We have dormancy, structural behavioral adaptations. Okay, so it's kind of going specifically into details about it, like chemicals for germination, seed from a tough capsule. Okay, moist regions where it rains predictably, capture the precipitation, so least runoff, maximum water absorption. And then we have water storage mechanisms we're talking about here for other organisms in the desert. So we were talking about plants up here. Now we're getting into other organisms like the cactus, saguaro, desert animals store water as well, and then desert ants. So again, there's a lot of supporting details here, and it's not like you should completely skip those entirely because the ACT can ask you questions on those details. But just for a really quick broad skim, we see that we're talking about adaptations of various organisms to deserts, the fact that they don't get a lot of water and they need to store water so that way they can survive. So each paragraph is kind of dedicated to different organisms for the most part. Oops, sorry. It's dedicated to different organisms for the most part. And it's just important to, again, go a little bit quickly through the supporting details, but you don't need to worry about it being, um, like something you need to like focus so much on. But you should know it just in case you have questions on it. So here are the questions. They start down here. Our first question is about the fourth paragraph, the shift in the focus of the passage. Okay, that's a general question. Probably want to come back to that. Measuring line 12, most nearly describes the way some desert plants what. I would probably do this question, one of my earlier ones. It's a specific line reference, and you can kind of read a couple lines of context to figure that out. Here are the other questions. Again, I'm going straight for lines. Okay, 36, line 7 through 11, paraphrase. Okay, perfect. Read those lines again, get a paraphrase, figure that out. Okay, 26, the word extent. All right, vocab and context. I will do that one. And then the others may seem either general questions or specific detail questions like 39 and 40. So I'll pause here for a second, pause the video, work through the questions, and then here are the answers for you guys to check how well you did on this passage. All right, so here's some personal strategies that I have before we wrap up. Start with the passage you're the most comfortable with. Everybody differs. For me, I feel like I understand science passages a lot more than fiction, which is why I've been talking about doing science stuff first. Plus, in my opinion, I feel like the organization is just a little bit better. But if you do really like fiction and you can understand it really well, by all means, go ahead and do it first. Remember, you don't need to do these passages in the order that you're given. You want to do the passages that you can get through quicker so you can leave time for your harder passages if need be. You want to do line reference specific questions first before general questions. Obviously, as we were going through the passages, I looked straight for lines and try to answer those so you can spend a little bit more time on general questions. You want to time yourself well. On average, you should be spending around 8 to 9 minutes per passage. This is, obviously not set in stone. If you're answering passages at a consistent level where you're getting questions correct, because again, you don't want to go too fast, but not too slow either, then obviously you'll have a little extra time for you to either check your answers or spend more time on harder questions in harder passages, for example. So it's a little fluid, but in my opinion, you should do your best to answer every single question in every single passage. I know sometimes people say, oh, it's better for you to focus on 3 passages, get as many right in there as possible, and guess on the 4th passage. I really don't like that because I feel like you guys can all get really high scores when you're just managing your time pretty well and focusing on getting as many points as possible while giving yourselves time to work on harder questions. All answers you pick should be in the passage or inferred from the passage. This is important. You should be able to find it in the passage, or you should be able to say, given what I know in the passage, this is a logical extension of it. This is very important because otherwise it's not going to be correct. And another thing, if you have answers that are partly wrong on the ACT reading section, they're entirely wrong. So the answer that is correct, the entire answer is going to be correct. All right, everyone, thank you so much for watching this video. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe and comment down below if you like this video or if you have any questions. Thank you so much.